We are going to start today's conversation with Brad Harrison, founder and managing partner at Scout Ventures. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thanks. So good to be here. Happy to support your goal of, helping 1 million entrepreneurs get to $1 million.
Brad, let's get to know one another and let's introduce you to our audience. Tell us a bit about your background as well as what you're doing with Scout.
Sure. So, I would say I've kind of always been an entrepreneur. I grew up in a family where, my dad was an entrepreneur. And so from the earliest stages, from, cutting lawns to painting company, I've always kind of had a business. And then ironically, I wound up going to the United States Military Academy at West Point, studied theoretical economics, and spent 5 years serving as a airborne ranger. So had that 9 years kind of service, and then came out of that and transitioned through the MBA program at MIT School of Management, studying on new product and venture development. So really focused on everything from building products to building businesses and how you basically become an entrepreneur and how you fund entrepreneurs. And was very fortunate that I was there during the first .com bubble. So I got to see the insanity of, people dropping out of school, launching a company and selling it for $1 billion, 6 months later. It was a pretty exciting time. But then I also got to see the implosion, and I got to see how when you don't have core fundamental strengths in your business, and that when you don't operate with discipline and focus and purpose, you're not going to have a real business. I spent time at America Online, was fortunate enough to work for Ted Leonsis, the vice chairman, and David Colburn, the head of business development. So got some really good experience on kind of like how a big tech company thinks about everything. Then I went to a small tech company that was in the contextual advertising space and grew that to about 100 million in revenue. And then at that juncture realized that I really wanted to help multiple entrepreneurs, not as many as you, not 1 million, but I figured, it was more a fit for me to help multiple entrepreneurs than it was to just focus on one company. So I started advising, was very fortunate that I got to come across some really amazing entrepreneurs. One of my favorites from early on was a guy named Amar Goyal, who started Comely and Pubmatic, which just went public last year. So pretty excited. Saw that from day one all the way through IPO. And then in 2009, I started investing. And by 2011, I had created my first fund. We actually called it the BHV Entrepreneurship Fund. And the purpose was to enable entrepreneurs. We viewed our role as using our capital and our experience to make smart entrepreneurs build great companies. So that was kind of our goal. Fast forward, we have 4 funds now. I've built out the team. I have 2 other partners, Wes Blackwell, who's a graduate of the Naval Academy and Darden School of Business, and Sam Ellis, who's a graduate of the Military Academy at West Point. And then our associate is also a graduate of the Naval Academy. So now we have a very strong focus on what we call hard to access founders, which are founders coming out of the military, the intelligence community, and leading research institutions and national labs. So, that's people transitioning out of the military, similar to the way I did. People coming out of the NSA, the CIA, who have spent a lot of time working and developing technologies that are now becoming civilians. And then people out of places like Carnegie Mellon, MIT, Johns Hopkins, Georgia Tech, and then the national labs, Sandia, Los Alamos, and a bunch of the national labs. And what we focus on is what we call dual use technology. So technology that has both a government use as well as a commercial use. And our secret sauce is that we tap into what is called non-dilutive government funding. So it's neither debt nor equity, but it's a form of it shows up on the books as revenue, but it's really a program grant. So that can come from the Army, the Air Force, that can come from a National Science Foundation, Department of Energy. It really depends. And what most people don't realize is the largest investor in innovation since World War II is not Silicon Valley. It is the United States government. And there are billions and billions of dollars in each of these programs. You know, the Army's program for grants last year was about 3.3 billion. That's just the Army. You know, the government is passing the Endless Frontier Act, which is about 110 billion to support innovation all through grants. So what we do is we take our money, non-dilutive capital, and a bunch of really smart people, and we use that to build companies that we say are making the world a better, safer place.
Very interesting and different. Where are you operating out of, Brad?
So we have a presence in New York, Washington, D.C., and Austin, Texas.
I see. And you are based where?
I am in Austin, Texas, after 20 years in New York City. So
okay.
the reason Austin became our new headquarters is at the request of several people that we were speaking within the Department of Defense. The former Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army had asked us if we would be more involved in what the Army was doing, which was moving the center of innovation from Washington, D.C. to Austin, Texas. And they established a new innovation command called Army Futures Command, which is actually headquartered in Austin. And that command has 6 other sub-commands. So, you know, the future of mobility has a presence in Detroit. You know, the future of communications has a presence in Aberdeen Proving Grounds. So basically, we've centralized everything. And the other thing that's happened is that all of the major corporations that participate in this part of the economy, Boeing, Lockheed, General Dynamics, all of these really massive military industrial companies have brought part of their innovation teams here to co-locate. So we have Army Futures Command, we have the Army Applications Lab, we have representatives from Air Force and all these other units. They're all centralized in Austin, Texas. So that's why we're here.
And you said you have 4 funds. What size funds are you operating with?
So our last bucket of money was a little over 50 million. About between the primary fund and an SPV, it was about 56, 57 million. And we'll be raising, our next fund should be somewhere, I'm hoping, north of 100.
And what check sizes do you write?
So our core fund is a seed fund, and our seed checks tend to be $500,000 to $1 million first check, and then we'll reserve 1 to 3 million in follow-on. So you know, our largest positions in Fund 3 are roughly 2.75 million, 3 million, you know, and that's over subsequent rounds. We also have a incubation program where we'll partner, it's led by my partner, Sam Ellis, but we'll actually partner with an entrepreneur early on, and we'll provide like the initial 250,000 in tranches as we build out the team. And so if it's a business person, we might go find the CTO. If it's a CTO, we might go find the business person. And the reason we like to do that is we, you know, as I mentioned, I view myself more as an entrepreneur than a VC. Just so happens that my entrepreneurship was around building a VC. And along the way, we incubated a couple of companies. Some of those, one of them just relocated to Austin called Assurely, which does insurance products for the kind of, you know, collaborative economy. So that business was founded and incubated out of Scout with my partner, John Rue, at the time. We came up with the concept, we funded the initial, and then we recruited the management team. And then the management team raised the Series A and is, you know, now independent on their own. Our most successful company that came out of Scout was called Unite Us, which was founded by Dan Brillman and Taylor Justice. And they just completed a round led by Iconic at a $1.65 billion valuation. So
what does Unite Us do?
Say that again?
What does Unite Us do?
So Unite Us basically uses the social determinants of health to provide optimization in the health system. And they really do that with two sets of customers. So one set of customers is the Department of Health and Human Services at the state and city level. So currently we have 41 states as customers. I think we have 26 statewide engagements. So in the state of North Carolina, we have a relationship with the Department of Health and Human Services at the state level, and we have a presence in all 143 counties. And we help kind of connect all the things that play into healthcare. So it turns out that if you go to the emergency room and you find that woman that shows up with pneumonia every 2 to 3 months, if you actually look and you find out, well, she's not eating properly because she needs food assistance, and she's homeless, so she needs housing assistance, and she doesn't have a job, so she needs employment assistance, and she doesn't have a job because she needs education assistance. So what the governments are realizing is that they can really lower the burden on the healthcare system by addressing that. And then you layer in the United States, the opioid epidemic, right? Yeah. Which is really a huge crisis that again can be addressed by some of these social determinants of health. So we have Health and Human Services as one of our main constituents. And then on the other side, our customers are Kaiser Permanente, Dignity Health, CVS Aetna, Blue Cross Blue Shield. And what we're doing on that side is using the same technology and adding optimization within the healthcare system. So, it turns out that, you trip and you sprain your ankle, and I trip and I sprain my ankle. If I go to my doctor says, okay, go do PT for 12 weeks. And he writes me a script, and I go to PT, and it costs the insurance company $2,000 in PT. Your doctor says, oh, no, let's send you to a specialist. You then go to an orthopedic. He sends you for x-rays and an MRI. And then at the end of those, 6 weeks of tests, he writes you the same script for 12 weeks of PT. Well, you cost $80,000 on the health system, and I cost $2,000. So they're trying to also predict outcomes by looking at different variables. And ultimately, it's all about data, and it'll ultimately come down to the actual providers, the doctors. But there's also a lot of stuff related to care coordination. So if a patient comes in and they need to get referred to a social worker, the whole platform is now digital instead of paper.
Very, very interesting. So curious, when you work with these state governments on, really identifying opportunities to impact, I guess, socially disadvantaged people, what are you seeing? What is actionable? What are the governments doing with that data? Are they changing policy? Are they introducing programs? What's happening?
Excuse me. Excuse me. Allocating money is really the main thing. Sorry. Excuse me.
Yeah.
1 second.
Take a moment. No worries.
Sorry, I think I got some green tea from my tea bag stuck in my throat. There you go. I gave up coffee like 5 years ago, and now I drink matcha and tea, and who knew you could choke on it? Anyway, I also get very excited about talking about some of our companies, so maybe that was it. So you're seeing a couple of things. You're seeing governments trying to change policies. You're seeing governments actually wanting to understand how to use technology and data to improve patient outcomes. And we did some tests with the Department of Veteran Affairs using Unite Us's technology. And what we saw was people that were actually processed through the platform, their outcomes were astronomically better than people that were getting processed in the old paper. And it's really, really hard to argue with that data. And some of the data is like, well, when you process things through paper, it might take 90 days from when somebody says, hey, I need help, to getting help. Well, if that person is having mental health or suicidal, right? Like 90 days, like that's not going to work. So a lot of it is, I think the governments, especially at the state level, are really trying to allocate resources to be more efficient. I'm not, I'd say my partner Wes is probably the guy. He's in DC, so he's much more of the policy, political side of the house in terms of tracking. Ultimately, it's pretty simple: food, water, shelter, the basic things that people need, right? It's not that complex.
And that's complex, and it's so complex. I mean, I live in Menlo Park. San Francisco is a really large homeless problem, and for years and years and years, the government has not been able to solve this problem, and this continues to be a terrible.
I mean, we have the same thing in Austin.
So right? Coming back to the more the venture discussion, what do you like to see before writing a $500,000 to $1 million seed check? What do you like to see in the company?
Yeah, so we over-index on the founders, right? So our biggest thing for us is chemistry with the founding team, right? So we try to make sure that we have that chemistry. That's probably number one. And in checking that chemistry, I think for us, we plan on being partners with that entrepreneur, at least in the first venture, for 10 to 15 years. And if that goes well, we plan on keeping them in our bullpen forever, right? When you find a good entrepreneur, you want to keep working with them. And so it's a little bit of coachability and compatibility. We want to make sure that there's no issues with integrity or moral code, right? Feeling like we all have the same values is pretty important. That's kind of like the people side. And then from a business, we want to see that the entrepreneur can articulate a clear vision of what they're trying to build and why it's important. There are a lot of entrepreneurs that have great ideas that are just not venture businesses. They're great businesses, and they can make $1 million or $2 million, and they can be a great lifestyle business for that entrepreneur. And we're fully supportive of that. But that doesn't mean it's going to get the scale of venture businesses. So we want to understand the vision. We want to see how it's going to get to scale. And then lastly, we want to understand how what our special skills are at Scout is going to help exponentially grow that business. How is, our relationships within the DoD potentially useful? How's a relationship with a government lab potentially useful? What are the things that we bring to the table that can help differentiate that company?
Okay. And when you do these incubation stage ventures where you're writing like a $250K check, what is beyond all this? What else is relevant for an entrepreneur to be considered for that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in that program, it's kind of really about just the person or people, right? So normally it's their background, what they've done that's relevant to whatever they're kind of thinking about right now. We have an entrepreneur that we're probably going to move forward with, who had experience at 5 or 6 major companies, had very big budgets, was able to, understand the way those budgets worked in context of growing customer audiences and retention, just had very, very, very experienced relevant with a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of brands that were very successful. And out of that has a vision for a product that, he thinks he can build that would help all these emerging brands really more efficiently acquire customers. And so that's
Okay.
interesting to us. It has some AI involved. He's got a lot of experience, he knows the landscape, 20 years doing it. So we're really looking for relevant experience. And then to some extent, just the intellectual horsepower, right? Being an entrepreneur is a really lonely and stressful job, right? The buck kind of stops with you. So, you're looking for the right, person in the right stage of life. Uh, you know, I wouldn't recommend anybody that just had three small kids decide to quit their job and become an entrepreneur on that given day. It is like not the best time. Although I was an entrepreneur, before I had kids and while I had kids, and I was very lucky that my wife was super supportive and, she worked, and that enabled me to take more chances. And so, we had our own team dynamic and it worked out. But a lot of it is also, being able to commit the cycles. Most of our entrepreneurs in those incubation programs tend to skew younger, single, coming off of some sort of corporate experience in, worked at Google or Facebook or, some big brand.
And how many of, or what percentage of your entrepreneurs follow the path that you took? You did one of the military schools, or your partners, you all did one of the military schools, and then you did MIT for business school. Is there
Yeah, so
a
so
significant
so
that have that
couple of
contribution?
things. Yeah, so we launched. We also, my partner Wes and I, with the support of kind of Sam as well, we launched something called the Academy Investor Network.
Mm-hmm.
And the Academy Investor Network is actually designed specifically to help veterans and graduates of the service academies who are building businesses. And they tend to be earlier in the life cycle, pre-seed, seed, a little bit earlier than Scout can handle. And
Mm-hmm.
we hired two amazing people to run that company. One is Sherman Williams, and one is Emily McMahon. Sherman is a Naval Academy grad. Emily is a West Point graduate, and they're amazing. Actually, Sherman's out west right now, helping run Techstars, and he's helping run that program out there with Matt Kozlov. So that helps a bunch of the very early, that sees a lot more entrepreneurs with kind of that service academy background, because
Mm-hmm.
that's really like a feeder for what we're doing at Scout, even though we kind of help launch it and support it. I'd say at Scout, you know, maybe 20% of the founders come out of the service academies, maybe last. I'd say it's more, you know, I'm just trying to think right now. We have a team out of the NSA, we have a team out of the CIA.
But my question was a bit more like, what percentage of these kind of backgrounds, the military or government services background, have a combination of a stint at a major university like you did?
Well, I think a lot of people
Is
that
that a common
transition.
path?
Yeah, well, listen, I think a very traditional path to transitioning out of the military is to go to grad school, right? Like
Okay,
that is
is a common path.
that is a very common path if you're getting out early in your career. If you're getting out after 20 years,
Yeah, it's different.
you've probably already gotten a master's or a doctorate while you were in the military. So
Mm-hmm.
you've already done that, right? So I think a lot of them have done that. The national labs population tend to not have the military background, but most of the people that have been in the national labs,
Experience it.
10 years at Los Alamos, right? And they worked under whoever was the pioneer
Yeah,
in technology
I
X
get it.
or, yeah. So, we have 4 quantum computer companies, um, or quantum technology companies. It's only one does computers. And, one of those is out of Toronto, one of those is out of Berkeley, one of them's out of Texas, and the other one is out of New Mexico. And so one came out of Los Alamos, one came out of Berkeley. The one out of Toronto had some different universities involved. And the one out of Texas was just a bunch of people that had worked at Apple for 25 years, like people that had really had lots and lots of experience.
Okay, very interesting. Very interesting snapshot and segmentation of the entrepreneur population. We would be very interested in also the piece of this population that are not necessarily doing venture scale companies, because I've worked with people from military backgrounds. One of the key success factors in entrepreneurship is resilience and toughness.
Totally
And
agree.
the population that you are talking about definitely has that, and has that by training. So
Yeah.
even if they're not doing venture scale companies, I'm sure they are very capable of doing successful, sustainable businesses, which is our mission.
Great.
All
Would be
right.
happy.
Well, please go ahead. You were going to say something.
No, listen, I think to your point, a lot of people, they misunderstand people with military training. So they don't, they're like, oh, they just follow orders and they don't do that. Your average young soldier who spent time in Iraq and Afghanistan, and by the way, we've been at war for 20 years. So pretty much if they've served in the last 20 years, they probably spent time in a combat zone. Those soldiers are required to make decisions under pressure every single day. They're they're required to make that decision on the fly. They have to
Yeah.
be responsible, right? So I couldn't agree more. I actually think they make the best entrepreneurs. The other thing, and you mentioned you're in Menlo Park, so I'll pick a little bit at the West Coast. But the other thing about these entrepreneurs is they really care more about getting the right investor and building the right company than they do about what valuation they raised at or how much press they got, right? They're really like mission focused. And so we actually find that we have $2 billion unicorns. We have 2 unicorns in Fund 2. Both of them are by military-led founders, Unite Us and ID.me. And we have another unicorn in Fund 3, and one of the founders is an Air Force Academy graduate who is an F-15 fighter pilot. So if you look at our data, we're seeing the results out of that population.
See, I'll give you a bit more about how we think about entrepreneurship, which I think is synergistic with what you're saying. Our definition of entrepreneurship is customers, revenues, and profits. Financing is optional. Exit is optional. So if you take that lens, valuation and press and all of these things matter less. What matters more are the fundamentals of, can you actually build repeatability in your business such that you can constantly sell whatever product or service to a large population of people to grow your business. And I think the point that besides resilience and toughness, there's also the discipline factor. Because when you're trying to build repeatability in a business, it's not like you're inventing brilliant stuff every day. What you're creating is discipline and process in an organization such that a whole bunch of people can follow that process and successfully execute on your objectives, tasks, missions, all of those across every level. The trick of that is discipline and regularity. It is not necessarily being a genius.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Couldn't agree more. And you know, listen, those customer revenues and profits, right? Like that's the same thing we focus on. You know,
Right.
it's, you know, whether or not they take money from us to accelerate the growth of any of those areas, you know, is really what it comes down to. But, you know, there are a lot of really smart people that can build great businesses and be very, very happy, you know, by just being consistent and doing it over and over again.
Yeah. Very good. Let's listen to Esteban. Thank you for your comments and sharing this unique snapshot of the entrepreneurship universe, Brad. It was a pleasure listening
Thanks.
to you.